I think this is so valuable for this political season, right? If you're a Democrat in here, what would it look like for you to sit down with a Republican and assume the best of them and vice versa, right? Like it can be so difficult. Assume the best about the person you're talking to. Jesus invites you to be part of this community at Crosswinds. What pains me more than anything else is when we see the local expression of Christ's body become so disjointed and so unwilling to listen to the journey and experiences of those around us that the centrality of our love for Jesus gets trumped and clouded by these secondary and tertiary things. Right? The tension that this verse presents to us is one that is tough to deal with, though, if we're being honest, right? Because you see, one of the mistakes that we can make in the Western church is when we think like, okay, we've got it, we're all one. They're like, we don't need to worry about anything anymore. All of the other like socioeconomic issues, all the other political issues are done, right? Because it's like, come on, man, like we're one, right? Just be one in Jesus. Like, don't worry about it. Like, I don't need to listen to your story. We're all one. But the other part of this that really matters is like, what Paul is saying is those identities, they don't disappear, right? I don't stop being a white guy, right? My wife doesn't stop being Filipino. My best friends don't stop being black or Hispanic, or we don't stop being Asian. We don't stop being straight. We don't stop being part of the LGBT community. Rather, what we do is we take all of those experiences and we bring them with us to the table and we examine them in the light of being a Christ follower, and we interpret them through the lens of Jesus and his sacrifice for you and for the rest of your identifying markers and the things that you believe are so orthodoxy that they're not allowed to be changed or stepped on or challenged. And we take all of that and we say, what does it look like to interpret these things in the light of being a follower of Jesus? How do we create space in the church for people who have been historically marginalized? How do I, as the whitest of white guys, listen to my black friend tell me about his experiences in life that are so different than mine through his tears as he's dealing with racism from other believers? Now, while walking this process out is harder, for sure, the solution to it, though, is pretty simple, right? We start with the perspective that those who may have other differing markers from us are brothers and sisters. This is a really fancy way of just saying, assume the best about the person you're talking to, right? When you hear, and I think this is so valuable for this political season, right? If you're a Democrat in here, what would it look like for you to sit down with a Republican and assume the best of them and vice versa, right? Like it can be so difficult. I remember trying to live this out one time. I was in college and I was living in an apartment in a city called Fullerton in Orange County, and I had this roommate named Ron, and Ron was this amazing musician. And Ron was a black guy from the projects in Cleveland, grew up there, and had a tremendously different life than what I had ever experienced. And I remember one night, he comes home, and his leg is just covered in blood, like just covered. And I'm like working on paper, and I like glance up, and I was like, hey, Ron, that's not normal. Like, what happened, dude? Just thinking that maybe he fell or something like that. And he proceeds to tell me that there was a car, as he was walking back to the apartment about a mile from where we were living, there was a car full of 4 white guys who had these beer bottles, and they hucked him at him while calling him the N-word, and a couple of them exploded all over his leg there and just cut him to pieces there. And then he proceeded to clean himself up like as if, like he talked about it so casually, right? And like just kind of started cleaning himself off as if it was just like he scraped his knee at the park or something. And I just remember being 1, confused, 2, mortified, and 3, angry at this idea that there would be a situation where somebody would treat my friend like this, right? And it wasn't the first time, we had seen racism in Fullerton, and it wasn't the last time either or anything like that. But what was really difficult and frustrating was, for me, is that Ron had just been accosted by dudes who had looked like me. And I could tell that there was a difficulty in conversation to be able to work this out because Ron had been dealing with this from white people his entire life. Yeah, and what was hard about that is like being the white guy in the room, right? From my end there, because it's like, there's a big part of me that wants to be like, hey man, remember, like not all of us are like that, right? They're like, we're not all racist there, or like we're not all that, it's like you're my black friend, so I'm not racist, right? Like falling into that trap. But sitting with him and hearing his story and just doing the bare minimum of being a safe place for him to talk about that like bottled up pain and frustration that he has had to work through his entire life was only possible for him because of the church that he came from. The church that he came from had powerful black and white leaders who worked together. The church that I came from was entirely intentional about having conversations about race, about being okay about standing in the gap and being uncomfortable with talking about that stuff from the stage. Because what we understood inherently, and what I hope you understand inherently today, is that at the foot of the cross, all of us are entirely equal. But what that doesn't mean is Ron stops being black. That his identity somehow gets consumed and is no longer important or valuable in that. What it actually means is that the things that make us different are the things that draw us closer together. Because Ron's life experience was way different than mine. Nobody ever threw a beer bottle at me for being white. But the idea of what we could bring together was that we could lament that the world was broken, but that we shared the ultimate hope of being a part of the restoration of it in Jesus Christ. But that means there's specific ways that we have to work that out. Right? This incident took place 15 years ago. And I still think about it pretty regularly. This relationship with Christ is what brought Ron and myself together as friends. And that wouldn't necessarily have happened otherwise without our experiences in the churches that we grew up in. But this is my hope in prayer for this community, that Crosswinds would be this place and continue to be this place. That we would be a church that is intentional about building on the legacies that have been established, of being a church that is okay with agreeing to disagree about even some important issues like who you're voting for. Or that we'd be able to worship together in a very real and profound way and have conversations that are hard. Because we know, we assume the best in one another. Right? This is one of the things that attracted me to this place, that I was willing to uproot my family and move 400 miles here. Because this church has been doing this. And in the world that we are continuing to step into, we need much more of this. We need to be the church that is known for this intentionality.